Hi, welcome to this beginner's Blender tutorial in which you will learn to make and smash this eggshell and then to build a geometry nodes system to make it react like this to an audio input. Of course, you can use any audio you like. For example, let's get started. Okay, here we are in a fresh Blender scene. I think a few words of introduction are necessary here. This is intended as a beginner's tutorial, not an absolute beginner's tutorial. If you've never opened Blender before and you don't know which way is up, then this might be a bit tough. If that's the case, I strongly recommend that you go and make a donut. But if you have maybe made a donut and a couple of other things, this should be within your grasp. As for more advanced Blender users, this is going to be punishingly slow. And yeah, I feel you. But the thing is, the effect, even though it looks kind of wild, is actually super, super basic. It's mega simple. So I thought, why not try and make a tutorial for an entry-level Blender user. I've enabled screencast keys down here. I'm going to try and tell you, shortcuts and keys that I'm hitting and so on. But I am almost definitely going to forget a few things. So keep your eyes on this if you can't follow something I've done. Okay, so without further ado, what are we going to do with our default scene? Well, first of all, we've got this guy. And yes, I know exactly what you're thinking. Please stop. Just don't. Instead, why don't we rename it? To rename it, we can either go up here or hit F2, and we are going to call it egg. I appreciate it doesn't look much like an egg, not yet, but it will do. Otherwise, this point light we do not want. It will become actively unhelpful later if we don't get rid of it. So select it and hit X. Yes, delete. Otherwise, with a camera, what I'm going to do is select it, hit Alt-G to, trust me, it hasn't disappeared. It's actually just gone to the world origin. And then I'm going to hit Alt-R to undo its rotation. And then, with it still selected, I'm going to hit N to bring up the sidebar. And I'm going to put 90 degrees into the x-axis, which makes it look that way. And then 90 degrees into the z-axis. I am now going to move it along the x-axis so that it's looking at the egg. There we go. By the way, if you're a more advanced user, I expect you have your own art department and you know how to make things look good. All of this business with the camera and lighting and texturing and so on that I'm going to do is for someone who's not confident in their own skills yet. So anyone who wants to make the eggshell that looks exactly the way it did in the introduction needs to follow these steps. So here's the camera, and to see what the camera sees, we click on this camera view. And okay, clearly we're too close to our egg. Well, not clearly, because you might not know, but what's going to be rendered is just the stuff in these bounds. I personally I loathe with a burning passion this kind of 0.5 passepartout business where you can see when you think you're looking through the camera, but you can see this stuff. It can be very misleading. So in order to rectify that, making sure the camera is still selected, we go down here to this green camera icon, go down to viewport display, and then pull this passepartout thing all the way up to 1. So now we can only see what will be seen in the final render. And we can't see all of the egg yet. It's getting cut off, as we know. So we've still got the camera selected. If we go a bit further up, yeah, that's nice. Now we can see the egg in all its glory. I think that's everything for chapter 1. It's probably a good idea to save at this point. So Control S, and I am going to call it collection contortion. Oh, God's sake, Contortion 1, and save Blender file, and see you in chapter 2. Okay, let's see about making our egg a little bit more egg-like. So click it, look for the spanner, blue spanner here, which is the modifiers panel. Add a modifier, search for subdivision surface. If I just put subdiv, that will be enough to prompt it. There we go. All right, it's a bit better. Let's click up the levels view on the subdiv from 1 up to 4. Now hit tab to go into edit mode, press 3 or click up here to get face select mode. Click on the top face, press S and drag the mouse in a bit. Yeah, that's a bit more egg-like. Okay, fantastic. We're done with this, so either hit Control A or click here and apply. Okay, so what we have now, it's an egg, but it's not an eggshell because it's completely solid. So let's give it some thickness by adding another modifier. This time, search for solidify. There it is. And bang! It looks exactly the same because it is thickening inwards and is completely opaque. We can't see through it. So in order to see the thickness, either click on X-ray mode up here or Alt Z. There we go. And we can see, yeah, the egg has a thickness, and that looks all right, actually. That's not too bad. You can make it a bit thicker over here if you want. But no, I think I'll go with, what was it giving me? 0.01. Yeah, actually maybe a little thicker. I'm going to go 0.02. Right, okay. We trust in this. We turn off X-ray mode and we apply this. Okay, we're getting somewhere. It's looking a bit faceted, so let's right click on the egg and hit shade smooth. Okay, not bad. Okay, I think we can get down to shading the egg, but before we do, I'll explain my lighting setup. I tend to work in cycles. Yeah, I know it takes a bit longer to render, but I think it looks great, and Eevee can look very good, but you have to enable about 19 different things, and I'm no good at that, so we're just going to work in cycles. Sorry about that. And GPU compute. And you don't see any difference here because we're still in this solid mode view. If, however, we go to viewport shading, wow, it looks worse because we haven't got any lights. We got rid of our point light. What I am using in this case is a sky texture. We go over here to this world thing, go to this yellow circle here, click it, go to the left, all the way down to sky texture, and bang! We have a very well lit egg in the sky. Let's look through our camera by clicking here. Okay, this is a bit too intense for my purposes, so what I'm going to do is turn down the intensity to 0.5. I'm going to bring down the elevation, which is how low on the horizon the sun is, to about maybe there, 2.3. And then, just for the sake of getting good shadows, I've experimented before with this, and what did I have? 127. So I'm going to rotate the sun, or the world, whichever, to 127. Yeah, that's good. Okay, I haven't rendered it out with a background. You can if you like, but to get a transparent background for a render, click up here on Render Properties, go down to Film, and click Transparent. Great. Without further ado, we can start shading this thing. Go up here to Shading, click over here to get Viewport Shading, and click again on the camera to see that camera view. Okay, we're going to need two materials for this egg. And we're going to make the kind of inner and outer. We're going to make the inner first. And yes, I know that this is the outer surface of the egg, but there's a reason I'm doing it in this order. It's not bad, it's nearly there. It's a bit too white, so I'm going to go for a kind of creamy off-white, something like that. And that's fine. Now we will need a second material. To add one, we go down here to the Material Properties panel and go up to here to this plus and click it, click New, and we're going to call this one Outer. And just so we can see the difference, we'll change the base color. I'm going for a kind of powder blue kind of an egg. You can, something about here, you can go any color of egg you like. And of course we can't see anything because we've not applied it anywhere yet. So with the egg still selected, hit Tab to go into edit mode. we can see we've still got the top faces selected from when we did the scaling down earlier. We don't want that. So click outside the egg, or Alt A to deselect everything. Then click any square that you can see, and still hovering over the egg, hit L. What this has done is selected all the faces linked to this one, which is perfect because it's all of the outer faces but none of the inside faces, and we only want this material on the outside. Okay, so we now go and click our outer material here and assign, and you can see it's changed. Hit Tab to go back into object mode, and yeah, it's looking a bit basic. So I think we can do a few things to give it some visual interest, but before we do, we are going to have to enable a couple of add-ons, or well, yes. So go to Edit and to Preferences. In Add-ons here to the left, search up here for Node. Just Node should be enough. And what we're interested in is Node Wrangler, this one. I have it clicked, I have it enabled already, but if this is not clicked, then click it. We will need it. And while we're here, there's another add-on we'll need a bit later. So type Cell, C-E-L-L, and there it is, Cell Fracture. Click this if it's not clicked. And okay, that's that. So here we are. I am going to add some speckles to this egg. And the way to do that is with a Voronoi texture. So Shift A to add, and just type VOR. Okay, VOR is enough to prompt Voronoi texture. We click it. Perfect. What we do now to preview this texture on our object is hit Control, Shift, and click on this node. And there it is. It already looks like some kind of weird egg thing. We are going to use it to make speckles, but importantly, we need to sort out the coordinate space that this is working off. Under the hood, this is in fact, we know if we click this node and then click Control T, it is working off generated coordinates, which is no good for our purposes. So, making a bit of space here, instead of generated, click on this blue circle to the right of object and drag out a noodle and stick it into this vector input. Okay, so it's looking okay. I think we're going for speckles, so we want smaller speckles. Think like, quite like that, about 13. Okay, it's a good start, but it's not quite what we want. So what we need to do is push in these grays. We're just interested in the kind of dots. So Shift A to search and just write color the American way, COLOR, and there we go, color ramp. Take this and drop it on this noodle. And there's no change, but if we take this click on this right tab, the white one, and pull it to the left, there we go, it's crushing it in. We just maybe bring out the contrast a bit with this. Okay, I like that. Of course, we don't want a black and white egg. We wanted our nice powder blue, so instead of white, we click here and select a blue. Okay, that will do. What we're seeing here is not the shaded output. We have kind of an absolute version of the color. So in order to see it with shading, plug this color ramp into the base color on the principled BSDF and either drag a noodle out onto the surface or just click this node, Control Shift click, and there we go. We got some shading. It's looking okay. It might nearly be there. Just for the sake of visual interest rather than realism, I'm going to add a bit of bumpiness because I think the light catches nicely that way. So down here, Shift A, type noise. We would like a noise texture. Importantly, and this might be a bit fiddly, but again, like with the Voronoi, the default coordinate or texture coordinate mapping for this node will be generated, which we do not want because it will break later. So let's take, click on this circle to the right of vector, take another noodle out and put it here. Okay, so now it's mapped properly. Now we press Control, Shift, and click to preview this noise texture. That's probably okay, actually, in terms of scale. We want to turn up the roughness a bit. Now, in order to use this as a bump map, first of all, we need a bump. So Shift A, type bump. There we go. And it's important that we plug it into the right socket here. So we're going from what we can see now, the factor, the FAC, into the height. And then we plug normal from here into this normal on the principled BSDF. Can't see anything yet because we're still previewing the noise texture. So to see what it looks like, we go Control, Shift, click. And yes, it looks dreadful because it's much, much too strong. So let's turn it down. Let's try 1/10 of that, 0.1. Might be a bit too subtle, actually. I could try let's try 0.5. Nope, still too strong. Let's go 0.2. Okay, a bit less, 0.15. Okay, what will make a great deal of difference here is the roughness on this material. At the moment it's on a standard of 0.5, but if we bring it down a bit, we can see this kind of slightly, it's catching it nicely. I don't know if this is really realistic in terms of an egg, but it looks nice. So I'm going to call that done. I'm going to call that an egg. So back into our layout. With the egg selected, go to Object, and then all the way down to Quick Effects to Cell Fracture, which we should have enabled a bit earlier. Okay, the settings for this. This is how many pieces, how many fragments or bits of eggshell you're going to end up with. I found 50 works quite nicely here, but by all means, please experiment. Perhaps you want smithereens. It's up to you. I found there's certain kinds of glitchiness which can be avoided with a little bit of noise here. So I'm going to put 0.1 to the noise. We're not doing any recursive shatter, so this shouldn't really matter. This is kind of important. What this refers to is the material that will be assigned to the edges, the kind of thin, well, the thickness of the egg. And at the moment it's okay. If you followed me step by step, it should look fine, because this is an index, so 0 is the first material, and the first material we made and we have listed over there is the inner, and that's the material we want. But if you've, I don't know, made it slightly differently, just be aware that this, if we applied the powder blue exterior texture to this here, it would look like total garbage, so don't do that. And I think, yes, that's everything. So hit OK. And it's not terrible. Okay, first things first. Whenever you cell fracture something, hit M and hit New Collection. I'm going to call this Eggshell Bits. There's two reasons to do this. One is that it's incredibly inconvenient to have 50 bits floating around inside your outliner. So it's nice and tidy to have them in a collection. And also for the geometry nodes effect, we will need them to be a collection. What we're seeing here, this really ugly effect, is Z fighting, which is actually a good sign. It just means that the fractured pieces are all sitting exactly on top of the underlying egg, which is still there. So if we just hide that egg up here, hey, it's much nicer. We might as well turn off the egg in the render as well, because we're not going to want it there. Okay. All right, now it's time to bring our audio into Blender into a usable form. So first things first, let's click outside here to deselect the eggshell bits, and then let's click this little checkbox here. It will disappear entirely. Let's bring in the audible version of the audio first. So go up here to this little plus and click it, go down to video editing, and click. Okay. Right. Before you bring in the audio, it's very important to know what frame rate you're going to be working in. I tend to be at 24 frames per second kind of person. I like the way it looks. I like the way motion blur looks at 24 FPS. But some people use different frame rates for whatever ungodly reason. For example, to make this play nice with OBS, I'm having to work in 30 frames per second. So over here in the Scene tab, which happily is already open, I'm going to take this from 24 FPS and change it to 30. It's important to do this before you bake your audio into your Blender scene. It's not the end of the world if halfway through something you decide you got the wrong frame rate, but you will have to rebake the audio before you make that change, because everything will go totally out of sync otherwise. Okay, so with our frame rate, making sure we are on frame 1, which you probably will be, but if, I don't know, you accidentally hit the spacebar at some point in the earlier section, like, whoops. Okay, now I'm on frame 35, which is no good. We need to bring in the audio at frame 1. Okay, you can either click this to go back to the start, or a very useful shortcut for this is Shift left arrow. That's gotta be useful because you're not always in a context where you have this thing, and Shift left arrow will work in other spaces when you need it to. So on frame 1, we go to Add, down to Sound, find our audio, add sound strip. Okay, there it is. And we hit spacebar to play. Yep, there it is. I'm using, this is a piece of music I made for a game jam a few years ago, just so I don't get copyright struck. You can use anything. There it is. Let's go to layout. We now have the audio audible. So even if we're in this space, if we hit space again, there it is. Okay, we need something for the audio to live on as accessible data. And for this, we're going to use an empty. Press Shift A, go down to empty. I tend to find plain axes works best for this. So hit plain axes. The first thing I will tend to do is move this out of the way of the world origin, because it's going to be bouncing up and down, and it can be quite distracting and annoying to have it right here. So G, Y, and then I'll just move my mouse to get it out the way. That's fine. Okay, making a bit of space here, we now are going to bake the audio to the Z location of this empty. Before we can do that, we have to make sure we're again on frame 1. Right now we're on 165. If I baked the audio now, it would be a disaster. So again, Shift left arrow takes us back to frame 1. And then we go up here to this location area. By the way, if this has disappeared, it's N will bring it back. So hovering over the location bit, press I to insert a keyframe. Right, so this is the one keyframe we will be using in this entire tutorial. In order to bake the audio to this empty, we need to use the graph editor. And you could go and find it. It's in here somewhere. Yeah, it's over here. But you might find you having to be flicking between graph editor and timeline. And a really, really useful shortcut to do that is Control-Tab. And so here we have the graph editor. With our empty still selected, go down to the bottom left, click on this little arrow. Okay, we do not care about the X location or the Y location, so let's hide them just to show how much we don't care. And now we click on the Z location, and this thing should turn kind of a more vibrant blue when we do. Yes. Okay, so now we have the Z location selected. We go to Channel and Sound to Samples. If for some reason you're using an earlier version of Blender, I think in 3.4 they changed. This used to be called Bake Sound to F Curves, and it changed. And for a minute it was horrifying that it seemed to have disappeared, but it's just this now. So Sound to Samples. And for the sound itself, go and select the same audio you have up in the video editor. So in my case, Shufflecat 3. Okay, so what we have here, you can kind of make it out. It should look familiar-ish, because it looks, and it is, essentially an analog waveform. And what it's done is baked the Z location. So if we press play, we can see what's what's happening here is the Z location of this empty is matching the amplitude of the waveform. And this is perfect. This is now usable data. There is one very important number that we're going to have to, well, I suggest you find out at this point. In order to find it out, there's a bit of very, very fiddly UI here, which is Control, click down the scroll wheel and drag up. Okay. And what we're interested in finding is the peak, where this audio is peaking, which is about, we can see here, it's about 1. We don't need the exact number, we just need a rough sense of this. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I can't anticipate the audio that you're going to use, and it will vary. It's never going to be, 200 or something stupid like that, but it might be a bit higher, it might be considerably lower if you're using stems, for example. Anyway, if that little UI trick was too much, there's another way to find out this number. Again, Control-Tab to get back to a timeline. If I click up here on this gizmo, let's say on the X, so we're looking down the X-axis, and then use this hand thing to move over, and then let's go back to the beginning of the sound by Shift left arrow. If we hit play again, try and find out how high does it get, and yeah, you can see, I mean, these are units of 1 meter, and it gets to about, yeah, it peaks at about 1. So it's good to know this number and write it down somewhere. At about this time, I would tend to mute the audio, because as long as it's synchronized, we're going to be working on other things, and frankly, it's going to get annoying. Even if it's your favorite tune in the world, you're going to get sick of it. So over here in the video editor, we hit H, which in other contexts means hide, but in audio it means hiding it from your ears or muting. When the time comes, it is Alt-H to unhide or unmute it, but H, we want it muted for now. Okay. All right, finally, the protein. First things first, I forgot to rename this empty at the end of the last section because I'm an idiot. So why don't we, making sure that the empty is selected, hit F2, and let's call it audio. Great. Okay, geometry nodes. First things first, we'll need a container for our geometry nodes. So Shift A, go to Mesh, and scroll up. Ugh, it's annoying. Annoying when it goes this way, but scroll up to Plane. This is fine. Let's give it a name before we do anything else. So F2, and I'm just going to call it GN. This is just so it doesn't get lost later. Right, so up here, let's go over to our geometry nodes workstation. This is a spreadsheet and we don't need it, and we would like as much of a viewport here as possible. So let's go to this corner until the cursor turns into these crosshairs and click and drag left. There we go. You can see it a bit better. Okay, down here, let's click New to make a geometry nodes. And let's name this while we're here. I'm going to call it Collection Contortion. Okay. As I said, this is just a container. We don't need this plane to be visible anyway. So let's click to the left on this group input and hit X to get rid of it. What we do want is our eggshell bits. So clicking up here and dragging in, there they are. We can't see them yet because they're not hooked up to the output. So clicking this green circle to the right of instances, we drag a noodle out and stick it into the geometry output. And there we go. Okay. First things first, let's get this right. Original is fine here. We do want to separate the children. We do not want to reset the children. If we reset the children, that happens. We don't really want that. Okay, let's get started. The first thing we'll need here is a set position node. To get one of these, hit Shift A and just write set space pos, P-O-S. And you'll see the top option here, set position. Click on it and drop this node onto this noodle. There we go. Okay, all of the heavy lifting of this effect is done by a single noise texture. Let's get that in. Shift A and just write noise. Here we go. We're going to be using the color output, which if you scroll in a bit, you'll see it's a diamond, not a circle, because this is a field output, and we're working critically with fields in this context. We're going to plug this into here, but it needs to go through a few things first. A noise texture works from 0 to 1 on each axis, which means that it has a kind of bias to 0.5, and we won't want that. What we need to do is recenter the noise texture. So click on the yellow diamond and drag out, and you'll see there's a a little plus above the cursor. If I let go of left mouse button, this search field comes up, and what we're looking for is subtract, and the top option here, vector math subtract, is what we want. To undo that bias on the noise field I was talking about, we subtract 0.5 from each axis. So click and pull down, let go, and write 0.5. Okay, again, before we go into the set position, we will need a scale node. So click on this vector output diamond, let go and write scale, and the top option, vector math scale, is what we want. Okay, so now we'll take this output and plug it not into the position, but into the offset. This is an offset we're dealing with. So, hey, there it goes. It's exploded a bit. Okay, so far, this is only a 3D noise texture. We actually want a 4D noise texture. So at the top where it says 3D, click and scroll down 4D, please. Okay, so now we have access to a W dimension. If we move this, we can see it's moving. By the way, if you press down Shift while dragging a value, it will go, you get much finer detail. It'll go slower. Okay, so this is something. We can animate this W value using the scene time. So to do that, let's Shift A and write scene, and the top option will be scene time, which is what we want. When it comes to numbers here, I'm just going to give you the numbers that, and you're going to have to kind of trust me that it works. Using the frame output here, we drag out a noodle, let go, and write divide. And so we get another divide in a math node. This is not a vector math node like these ones. This is just a float because the frame is a single one-dimensional float value. We want to divide the frame by, let's say, 15, and plug this value into the W on the noise texture. And now if we hit play, or the spacebar rather, okay, it's going away. It's too fast and it looks really chaotic. This is because the scale is too high. As I say, you're going to have to kind of take my word for it that these are good numbers. For an object or a collection of objects of this scale, okay, I'll just put them in first. We want a scale of 1. We want no detail at all, so 0 in the detail. No roughness, 0 in the roughness, and don't worry about the other things. If we now hit the spacebar, we can see, okay, there's a kind of a smoothness to it. There's a kind of continuity between each piece and the neighbor. You know, they won't be moving identically, but they'll be, you know, this piece is more like this piece than it is like that piece. And it's this kind of smoothness that we're after that makes this effect look good. As I said, these numbers will work for something this size, but this egg was made from the default cube primitive, which is 2 meters cubed. So this egg is, you know, about the height of a fully grown human being. If you're using other objects or a collection of other objects, let's say if you're using real world scale, you would need different numbers here to get the equivalent effect. In general, the smaller the real world object, the larger these numbers have to be, which might be counterintuitive, but that's kind of how texture space works. So if this was much smaller, the scale would have to be higher and the speed might have to be different. I'm just going to give you the numbers that will work on something of about this size. Okay, so here it is wobbling about, or contorting. I'm calling it contortion because I can't think of it. I can't think of a good word for whatever this thing is that it's doing. And I mean, you could call it wiggle or jiggle or wobble, but those things tend to have other technical meanings actually. And as far as I can make out, contortion doesn't seem to be taken as a Blender specific term. So yeah, there it goes. At the moment, it's scaled to 1. What happens if we take this scale, take it down to 0? Well, it stops working entirely, because now the whole thing is multiplied by 0 in every axis, so it's having no effect whatsoever. What happens if we put it to a small number, let's say 0.1? Okay, well then we get a tiny amount of it. And this, scaling it, is how the entire effect works. What we are going to do is take our audio signal, now baked onto this empty, and we're going to use this as a mask, use the audio as a mask for the effect. Okay, how to do this? Let's make a bit of space. I've conveniently renamed it to audio, so we're going to click this and drag it in, and I'm going to press spacebar because this is distracting me. Okay, remember we baked the audio to the Z location of our empty. So if we pull out a noodle from location, let go, and write separate X, Y, Z, that's what we want. Okay, we can get, using this node, just the Z information, which is perfect. This is what we want. We pull out a noodle from Z, and it goes into map range. Okay, the top option here, the value of a map range node. Okay, and what this will do is it'll take our audio signal, which will be going from silence, theoretically, whatever the floor of 0, to whatever the peak is. And remember, that number, which was so fiddly to find, we need that now. So it's going in the from min and from max. That's where our audio values go. So from min of 0, from max, in my case, it was about 1. I think there's a few taller peaks a bit later, so I'm going to actually say 1.1. Whatever your peak was, that number goes in this second box, the from max. The 2 min and 2 max is the amount of, is the number that's going to go into here. So the amount, the scale amount on the effect. Okay, let's just plug it in. We can try it from 0 to 1. Okay. And pressing spacebar. Yeah, we can now see it's not happening all the time. It's only happening, or it's happening equivalently to the audio signal. We can just test that this is actually in sync with our audio by clicking up here on Video Editor and pressing Alt-H to unmute this sound. And clicking back to geometry nodes. Yeah, okay. It's working. This, okay, I'm going to go back to Video Editor and H, to mute it again. So it's working, it's definitely working. This is quite a tame, in fact, let's look through our camera by pressing the camera icon. This is quite a tame version of the effect, because we're just going from 0 to 1. What if we go 0 to 2? Okay, so now we're getting a stronger version of the effect. One thing is, you play with these numbers, of course. What I quite like is to have the minimum, which should be silence, mapped to a not 0, not nothing, but a very small amount of the effect. So even when there's total silence, there is a little bit. So I'm going to go in the third slot, the 2 min, I'm going to write 0.1. So even when it's very quiet, there's a little bit of the effect. And this is, we're nearly there. We're nearly done. Not quite, because all of these instances, the fragments are moving, their position is changing, but they're not rotating, not yet. And so let's get them rotating with the effect. So back here, Shift A and write rotate instances, this top option, and drop this on this noodle. Now, this shouldn't be this easy, frankly. Usually when we want to mess with something's rotation, we have to do all kinds of complicated business involving aligning Eulers to vectors and stuff. And this is miraculously simple. I kind of stumbled across it a couple of years ago when I really didn't know what I was doing. So I didn't know how lucky I actually got. Most of the time when you're learning geometry nodes, well, 98% of the time, you will just be hitting brick walls. And it's useful because that's how you learn, but it's very, very rare that you just plug something in and it works. So this was one of those occasions. So all we need to do is take out another noodle from this scaling node and plug it into rotation. And it's quite subtle, but you can see, yeah, they are rotating, and it kind of works. And the reason it kind of works is the same with the position. There is a kind of continuity between neighboring fragments. So the rotations will be similar enough that it looks like it's part of a kind of continuous rotation somehow. This is maybe a bit subtle still. So what we can do is just take this value, which is now going to the rotation, and we can scale it up. If we click on this scale node and hit Shift D to duplicate the node, and then just drop it on this noodle, and then I think we can go, I don't know, as high as about 2.5 here, and that will make the rotations more prominent. Maybe that's, yeah, okay. These are the values, yep, 0.1 and 2 and 2.5 that I used in the introduction. So we really are almost there. One one difference is I had the thing rotating, so why don't we do that? What we do here is Shift A and write transform geometry. Okay, we could keyframe this, but the easier and lazier way of doing this is, like with the scene time into the noise texture, we can use another scene time node. Scene time. This time I'm going to use the seconds output, not the frame. Drag this out, let go, and write combine. And there's a bunch of options that come up for combine XYZ. We want the combine XYZ Z input. So this one right here. There we go. And this is just going to pipe the seconds of the scene into the Z, well, in this case, Z rotation of the whole system. Transform geometry. It's kind of, okay, the difference between a transform geometry and set position is a bit like the difference between working in object mode and edit mode. This alters things. Well, I'll just plug it in to the rotation. And you can see, hopefully, that it's spinning. As I was saying, this node, the transform geometry, alters things on the object level. So you could, whatever, move it around. Just undo that, 0. As a as a whole object. Whereas to work on a vertex by vertex basis, you'd use a set position node. Or in the case of a collection, we're working on an instance by instance basis. If you realized these instances, it would then be manipulating vertices. For this effect, we don't want that. Okay, and I guess we should have a look at a preview of what the... Okay, here we go. It's looking it's looking all right. Seem at the moment to be running okay. What I would recommend, I mean, particularly with a more complicated scene or with heavier geometry, things might start to lag, and at the point they do, in terms of monitoring the effect, which is to say, just kind of checking out how well synchronized it is to your audio, what I would recommend is down here where it says playback, hit this, and instead of play every frame, go down to frame dropping. And you'd think that sync to audio would be the one here, but I do not trust it. It has betrayed me in the past. So go to frame dropping, and you'll get, even if it's a bit kind of clunky, you'll get a better sense of how the final effect is going to look. Things will, in any case, run faster if we go, if we use solid view rather than the rendered view. Right. In terms, I think that's pretty much everything in the node itself. In terms of rendering, I'm not gonna go into too much detail because I'm aware that this tutorial is already becoming very long. But one thing to be said, let's go back into our layout and our rendered view and into our camera. Maybe actually clicking on the camera, we could bring it in a bit now. Because, how's that? Yep. As I said, we're working in cycles here, and one thing I like in cycles is motion blur. Geometry nodes and motion blur often don't play nicely together. Often it breaks. But for this effect, it should work really well. In terms of render settings, of course, that's up to you. Honestly, if you're rendering for animation, you don't need that many samples. You don't need 4,000 samples. You can get away with a lot less. What I tend to do is to put a time limit on a render, and I tend to find that 10 seconds per frame should be enough. It'll take a little bit longer than that for each frame to apply the motion blur and stuff, but just to see, let's find a frame which has got a nice explosion. Yeah, maybe that one. Just do a test render. Hitting F12. Yeah, this, how long is it going to take? All right, not bad, 10.49. So yeah, you can see it's got a nice bit of, a bit longer, 15 seconds. This motion blur will look fantastic when it's all rendered out. In order to render it out, of course, go to the Output tab, select a folder here to put all the still images. Don't try and render it out as a video from here. You're asking for it if you do that. Render it out as stills, and then in a new Blender file, in the video editing section, to render out a video, get a new video editing file, which will look like this. Drop your audio in on the bottom on frame 1 again, and then on frame 1, drop the image sequence of images that you have rendered out. And then render a video from there. Okay. I think, hang on, let me check. I've got a little checklist. Yeah, this should be obvious, but one thing here. at the moment I've got 250 frames because that's the standard. Of course, if you want to render a whole song, you'll need to know how long the song is. In the video editor, when you import the sound, it tells you how many frames long it is at the frame rate that you've selected. So in this case, 4,322 frames. So I would just, if I wanted to render out the whole thing, I would have to put this to 4,000 whatever frames and then render. Another thing which occurs is, this again should be obvious, but maybe it's not. This is a very basic effect, as I said. It has no idea about physics and collisions and stuff. You're going to get mesh intersections. They shouldn't be too noticeable, and you might not even mind, actually. But I found that a hollow object, like an eggshell, something like that, will kind of minimize the noticeableness and frequency of the mesh intersections. I guess because there's less volume to intersect. It shouldn't be that noticeable in any case, but yeah, this is a very basic node setup. To get, physics solvers and stuff into here, we'll turn it from super basic to super advanced. So we're not going to do that. Not that I could do that anyway. All right, I think that's just about everything. Well done for making it this far, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you have fun with this and make something with it. Tag me if you do. If you're interested in seeing other audio effects or audio-reactive graphics I've made, it's the reason I learned Blender was to make audio-reactive stuff, and so everything I do pretty much is audio-reactive. So check out other videos on this channel, or I have an Instagram which I just use for experiments for audio-reactive stuff, so have a look at that. And yeah, tag me or drop me a message. Thanks a lot. Peace.